Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Planning Your Microsoft Application Strategy in a Cloud Crazy World. My name is Lindsay Johnson, and I am the Director of Marketing here at AdaptivEdge. Today, we will be providing a high-level overview of Microsoft application deployment, pros and cons of cloud, on-premise, and hybrid topologies. We will be covering Exchange, SharePoint, Skype for Business, Active Directory, and their cloud counterparts in Office 365. Hopefully today you will learn some of the critical decision points and criteria to consider in developing your go-forward Microsoft application strategy. Without further ado, please welcome our Senior Managing Partner, Steve Soper. Thank you again for joining us today. Steve, you're up.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you guys attending and taking time out of your busy day. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Soper. I'm the Senior Managing Partner at AdaptivEdge, and as Lindsay said in her introduction, we're going to be talking about planning your Microsoft strategy in the cloud, and primarily that's going to be focusing on Office 365. My hope is that whether you're already in Office 365 with some workloads or considering it, that we have some material today that will be beneficial for you regardless of where you're at in terms of your process or decision making or your strategy planning for Office 365. So just real quickly, who is AdaptivEdge? We were founded in June of 2013. We were basically a Microsoft practice that was already formed and worked together for many years at another bar. And we basically left and took our team and started our own consulting practice and our own company. So we've been around as AdaptivEdge since 2013, but we really have been together as a team for about 7 or 8 years, the core members of AdaptivEdge. We are primarily focused on Microsoft and the Microsoft stack. We are a Silver Cloud Productivity partner. We are a managed partner out of San Francisco currently, the San Francisco Microsoft office. We are a Silver Collaboration and Content partner, and we pretty much have the capability of delivering services on all of Microsoft's core technology products. The only things we don't really do are Dynamics or CRM, but pretty much do everything else in the Microsoft stack. We do custom .NET development and Java as well. And we've got about 20 consultants on staff, mainly in California. We've got a couple folks kind of in a little bit outside of California or in the western states, but I think almost 18 of the 20 are in California, kind of equally spread between Northern California and Southern California. And everybody on the team is very experienced, has a decade or more of consulting experience. And we as a company have worked with a lot of different companies of varying sizes, industry segments, so we've got a lot of different experience working with large customers of more than 10,000 users to very small customers and across all sorts of different industry segments, etc. So we've got a lot of experience working with different customers and different requirements, and I think we've figured out a way to be adaptable to different organizational needs and requirements. So what we do cover is, like I said, everything in the Microsoft stack, but to break that down to specific products, the Exchange, Active Directory, SharePoint, SQL Server, Skype for Business, which was previously Lync, and still really is Lync under the covers, just kind of been rebranded as Skype for Business, System Center, Office 365, which is kind of really an all-encompassing cloud platform for all those products, obviously, Azure, Windows Server, .NET Development, Hyper-V, and Windows Desktop. So that's a little bit about what we cover. This is kind of your typical logo customer slide of projects and customers we work with in the last 12 months, and these are intentionally some of the larger customers, obviously, but this is kind of a representation of some of the customers we've done work for just in the last 12 months. So enough about AdaptivEdge. Talking now about the market trends in cloud and what's kind of driving adoption of Office 365 and other software as a service applications and cloud in general. And I think everybody kind of understands this, but I think it's just good to set the stage for the rest of the conversation. Basically the hardware computing capacity, given the speed at which CPUs and amount of memory has increased, has really contributed to systems that we can't fully take advantage of and are sometimes running overpowered for the applications that we have deployed on them. That results in underutilized hardware, which is expensive capital expenditures that companies have made and hardware that frankly doesn't work as hard as it should or as it could. So there's lost savings there or lost money in hardware that's underutilized. Over time, we have applications that continue to proliferate. We especially see that on the software as a service and the cloud side, but on-premise applications also have proliferated, and there is a never-ending number of applications that the business wants to consume as line of business applications or solutions, etc. And with all of that, the number of IT folks and the number of typically in companies we work with, the amount of IT spend actually has gone up very little or at a very slow pace. In some cases, it's actually remained completely flat or gone down, even though the work required to roll out these applications and support them obviously has a lot more effort that goes into that. So this has resulted in is just a gap between what IT typically has been able to keep up with in terms of workload applications and utilizing all the hardware, and what the demand is and what the capacity is. So what everyone's looking to get out of cloud for the most part, and this varies a bit by organization, but at a high level, I think what people are looking to realize is, reduce capital expenditures, get rid of the 3-year refresh cycle where the hardware gives off support and it has to be, replaced, sometimes in a forklift kind of fashion, and kind of reduce that expenditure. Reduce operational expenditures, so improve hardware efficiency, improve the management efficiency, and lower the cost and complexity for high availability and disaster recovery, which can be extremely expensive once you start looking at the amount of redundancy that's required to have true HA and DR. Those are expensive solutions to design, and they're expensive to manage ongoing. And then probably one of the biggest things is just infrastructure agility. The needs of the business and the needs of IT change so quickly now. Technologies always move quickly, but that pace just seems to go almost on a logarithmic type scale. That the key function is that IT organizations and businesses in general, from a technology standpoint, just have to be agile. They have to be dynamic. They have to be able to adjust quickly to new applications or the needs of the business. And so having load balancing and dynamic provisioning and really the standardization of services is really key to providing this agility. So these are the fundamentally, and there's obviously other reasons and points that people have for wanting to leverage the cloud, but these are kind of the key ones I think that we see that are most common. So cloud services, there's tons of different as a service. You can't even keep up with them these days, but basically it's broken down into application as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service, and this kind of makes up what is considered today cloud computing. And one thing that we're going to be talking today quite a bit about is the concept of hybrid, and hybrid really is the combination of internal systems that are run on-premise and other services or applications that do run in the cloud, but that work together and do have basically awareness of each other and work as a consolidated unified platform, and that's what we'd call a hybrid topology or a hybrid kind of configuration. And we're going to be talking a lot about how hybrid in many of these workloads for Office 365 either makes sense initially or even in some cases makes sense in the long run as really a good deployment methodology, a migration strategy, etc. So Microsoft's cloud offerings, they've got a bunch of them, but the primary ones are Office 365. That's a SaaS offering. That's the primary one we're going to be talking about today. Azure Active Directory, which is identity management as a service. We're going to touch on that as well, and then Azure, which is their infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. And we're not going to cover that in detail today, but we're going to do some follow-up webinars that will focus more on Azure and those components and best practices for Azure. So what is Office 365? Office 365 is fundamentally, the basic workloads that most people are looking to take advantage of are Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and Skype for Business Online. And by far the most popular one thus far, probably no surprise to anyone, is Exchange Online. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. But what we found is that as customers undertake the effort and the work to get to Exchange Online. And once you've actually done that successfully, you know, the capabilities of enabling SharePoint Online and Skype for Business Online are really pretty easy once you get there. Not to trivialize the amount of work required to roll those out to the organization and customize them and make it fit to the needs of the business, but you know, once you're in Office 365 and users are provisioned and actually using one workload, it's a lot easier to enable the additional workloads. So we see that quite a bit where people start with one and expand into the others over time. But besides Exchange, SharePoint, and Skype for Business, they have Office 365 Pro Plus. That's basically the rights to run the whole Office suite on up to 5 devices. And that's nice functionality just for the fact that you can run it on up to 5 devices, and that's a great strategy today for enabling users to run Office on different devices, a home device, a tablet device, a mobile device, etc. And the ability to provision that with the Pro Plus subscriptions is a lot easier than traditional volume licensing that requires keys and the management of that. Project and Visio Online, which is basically just the online counterparts of the thick client application, but again, great for people that don't have those thick clients or where you don't want to roll that out. And then there's some other newer functionality, Power BI, Delve, and Sway. That's pretty exciting. Power BI is a great analytics tool. It's kind of similar to Tableau if you're familiar with that. And then Delve and Sway are other collaboration tools that just, you know, are really aimed at helping individuals collaborate within the business, between departments, and even in some cases outside the business with trusted partners, customers, etc. So the first step in Office 365 planning is really about identity management and understanding how users are going to authenticate to Office 365 and the constructs of that. And I would say that this is not only important for Office 365, but it's also important for any other cloud-based application that you either are using today or plan to use in the future. So there's a lot of this planning that obviously is required for Office 365, but I think has a much bigger application when you look at cloud-based applications and the fact that the consumption of those and the proliferation of those is only going to grow over time. So the need for managing identities in the cloud is only going to become more and more critical as these things proliferate and as the users grow as well. There's 3 different identity management scenarios with Office 365 and some different flavors and some nuanced, you know, configurations with each one of these, but fundamentally these are the 3 that are most popular and kind of supported today. So it's cloud identity is the first one, directory and password synchronization, and then federated identity is the last one, and we're going to talk briefly about each one of these. So the first one is cloud identity, and basically this is where each user is created in Windows Azure Active Directory. It can be created just manually by going into the GUI and creating a user and filling all their information, or most often it's done by just doing a CSV import from a spreadsheet, and that's usually done via a dump from whatever identity management system is in place. That's fed into Windows Azure Active Directory, and then that serves as the authentication mechanism for Office 365 and allows the user to access that. It's very simple because we're basically just creating those users sort of manually, if you will, or via the CSV import. But the problem with this is that the cloud identities are isolated and independent from all on-premise or cloud-based identities. So they're really kind of an island in and of themselves. And what this means is that it's a poor experience for the end users and for IT administrators, because the end users basically have potentially a different login and password to remember. The login is their email address, so that might not be different, but the password is not synchronized to any other identity management system, and so based on password expiration settings, etc., that's potentially another password they're going to have to remember. And it's bad for the IT administrator because they have to manage all those users separately. So if you create a user or you provision a user, that has to be done separately in Office 365. Similarly, if you decommission or disable a user, that has to be done separately in Office 365. And then even the syncing of attributes like phone number or title or office, etc., that also has to, any attribute change has to be done. So while technically it's supported, I never would recommend this approach for any organization, even small ones, just because it's a poor experience for both the end users and the IT administrators. But it is a possibility. The next approach, and probably the most popular one by far, is using directory synchronization with password sync. And what this solution entails is if you have your Active Directory on-premise here, basically there's a separate DirSync, or now it's called Azure AD Connect, but it's a separate role that's deployed on a separate VM. It can be a very small VM, it doesn't require a lot of horsepower. And effectively this virtual machine connects to Active Directory, pulls information about any attributes that are changed, users that are added, disabled, removed, etc. And it synchronizes and replicates all that information up to Windows Azure Active Directory, including the password, which is encrypted as part of that replication. So this gives you effectively a much tighter coupling of the on-premise AD environment and those attributes and those users with Windows Azure Active Directory. And then what the user experience here is that as they log in to Office 365, they're still authenticating against Windows Azure Active Directory, but it's using what I would call same sign-on, not single sign-on, but same sign-on in the sense that it's using the same login and password as their on-premise login and password, but they're not actually going back to on-premise for authentication. So this is a good scenario because if you have a problem with any of your on-premise environment, basically as long as users can authenticate to the Windows Azure Active Directory environment, which is managed and hosted by Microsoft, then they can authenticate and access any of the Office 365 applications. But with this DirSync technology, which just requires that one VM, it at least is providing synchronization in the same sign-on experience. And if the DirSync server fails, it's the only problem there is it's not replicating changes, but it doesn't lock users out of accessing Office 365. So it doesn't become a single point of failure, at least in terms of Office 365 and any of the workloads there. The last option, which is the most complex but also the most powerful, is federated identity, which is really true single sign-on. And what this entails is an on-premise AD environment, but in addition to the DirSync server that we had in the previous slide with directory and password synchronization, we also have an ADFS server. And if in this case, you probably would want ADFS to be highly available, since basically this is a single point of failure for authentication. So you probably would want at least 2 ADFS servers, and then you need proxy servers for those as well. So in this case, when the user goes to Office 365 to authenticate, it goes to Windows Azure Active Directory, and using SAML tokens, Windows Azure Directory points back to the on-premise ADFS environment, which has a one-way trust established, and the authentication is actually done, against the local AD environment. So the authentication occurs in the on-premise directory, and so this is true single sign-on because the user who's already authenticated against the local AD environment, basically as this token is routed back to the on-premise environment, they're already signed in. So it basically passes that back, and it therefore reduces the number of logins that the user has to, that they're challenged for. Now, this isn't that big of a deal in some of the applications like Outlook and Skype for Business because it caches the login and the password. So sometimes it's actually not as big of a deal. But for accessing web-based applications and even for changes that are made to the client when you update any passwords, etc., basically this single sign-on experience makes it so that the user really never has to sign into any of the Office 365 applications. The challenge here is that as a lot of customers want to move to Office 365 for the improved resiliency, high availability, putting this architecture in place now makes the entire Office 365 service dependent on your on-premise ADFS environment. And that's sometimes a problem because making that environment resilient and then managing it ongoing is another thing you have to worry about managing on-premise, and a lot of the goal of moving to Office 365 is not to have to do that in the first place. So while it's very powerful, it also introduces some of the same challenges that people are looking to avoid by moving Exchange or SharePoint to the cloud in the first place. So that's kind of the problem with that. One of the things that can help with this is really developing a true cloud-based identity management strategy. One option for this is Azure Active Directory, and one thing that makes sense about this is that if you don't already have another tool like Okta or Ping or OneLogin or something else like that that you can use for this purpose, Windows Azure Active Directory Azure Active Directory is what Office 365 uses as its default identity management source anyway. So whether you use password and directory sync or federated services, you're going to be using Azure Active Directory anyways, and so then it's really just a matter of extending it or expanding it for other purposes if there's a good reason to do so, and it can play a bigger role in your cloud-based, or cloud identity management strategy. So Azure AD allows you to, basically put your directory in the cloud with all of the attributes, devices, everything in your AD environment can be put in the cloud. Allows you to manage that from a central place. Monitor and access cloud applications and see which applications users are actually accessing, and empower users by putting those applications on a portal that they can select and gain access to. Little Garter magic quadrant slide, because you have to always throw one of those in, but you can see for identity management as a service, Microsoft is out here and as far to the right as you can be. Because Azure AD is still relatively new, they're still kind of improving it and making it more robust, and I think the next time this is done, you'll see them up here in the leader quadrant with Okta, as their ability to execute improves. But because they are the on-premise directory for most customers, obviously Active Directory is by far and away the market leader or the preferred on-premise identity management solution. Kind of makes sense that their hosted solution will have the best integration and be the most powerful in terms of having a true hybrid and a cohesive strategy that really bridges on-premise to cloud-based identity management. So the concept of this, and again, this is not that much different with other platforms that are out there for identity management. So I think even if you're on a different platform other than Azure Active Directory, you can I'm sure make the parallels here. But basically, the switch here is really starting to look at the public identity as the control point, or the cloud identity as really the focal point for application access and authentication. So in the case of Azure Active Directory, one of the things that makes it powerful is the ability for it to synchronize from the on-premise environment, but to also synchronize back to the on-premise environment, so that they are constantly in sync. You can almost think of it like another domain controller that's just using domain controller native replication to keep them in sync. So by having that, we effectively can ensure that whether a user authenticates on-premise or in the cloud, it's the same attributes, same user, same password, basically the same information. And then we have all of our Office 365 applications up here, obviously, and then any other non-Microsoft cloud-based application. I think there's over 4,000 at last count. They're all the typical cloud-based applications. Almost anything that people use is out there. And if it's something custom or something that's not out there, there's some pretty easy APIs to actually build that in as a custom cloud application into the Azure Active Directory environment. And then the idea is that all of the devices, your PCs, and again, mobility is a huge thing, obviously. So more and more, people, employees, and vendors and workers are using mobile devices, home devices to connect, and this really allows for that model because a lot of these devices are not domain joined, and you don't have the management capabilities of them that you do with other on-premise devices. So in this concept, basically everything comes to Azure Active Directory, and it is the central control point for all authentication. Windows 10, by the way, has a cool feature, which is that it can authenticate directly to Azure Active Directory. So for some small companies, actually, the need to even have a domain controller at all is becoming somewhat obsolete, and I think in the next few years we'll see that become more and more obsolete. They're also rolling out domain controller as a service, so it has group policy and all of those other things. So we're going to start to see for now, this linkage between on-premise and the cloud is very important, and this bi-directional synchronization. But I think as time moves on, we'll start to see on-premise AD environments, not that it will ever go away completely, especially for large organizations, but I think we're going to start to see it play less and less of a role, and the cloud component or the cloud identity management become a much larger role. There's 3 different versions of Azure AD. Everybody, if you do this native integration with Office 365, you get the free version, but even with the free version, you can see that you can get, SSO for SaaS-based apps, non-Microsoft ones included, for 10 apps. 10 apps are included in this free subscription. And then you got basic and premium. Premium's got some really nice features like self-password reset, self-service password reset, excuse me, the ability to do multi-factor authentication. This is a huge thing. Multi-factor authentication is really challenging to do, especially across a whole bunch of different cloud applications. So being able to do that with Premium is something you actually roll out in a couple of days and have that fully working. And so there's a lot of great features there that come with the Premium edition, but you don't have to start there. You could start with something less than that and then expand it as necessary. And again, this write-back capability is key, and I think this is one of the reasons why it's so far over in the right in the Gartner quadrant there, is really that ability to write back to the on-premise AD environment and keep them in sync. And that's critical, because if we only replicate to that environment, but we can't replicate anything back on-premise, then it kind of becomes another island of information, and islands of information that don't have any synchronization between them just make the job harder for everybody, and it really is a less ideal experience for the end user and more work for the IT folks. So the next workload is the most popular one, Exchange and Exchange Online. And the reason why Exchange Online has been so popular and why that's been by far and away the most popular workload is that Exchange Online has full feature parity with Exchange 2013 on-premise. And Microsoft is in the process now of upgrading everyone to actually Exchange 2016. In fact, our tenant's been upgraded to Exchange 2016, but it has full feature parity with Exchange 2016 on-premise as well. And so really, when you look at just Exchange as an application, there's really nothing it can't do in the online version that it can't do on-premise. So fundamentally, I think that's why it's been adopted so readily, and it's been so popular, at least as far as the workloads in Office 365. We really strongly prefer or like to have a hybrid migration for the entire duration of the migration process, if at all possible. And sometimes it's required for permanently because of either applications that need to integrate with it, or other requirements for devices that have some exchange-aware kind of component that need to have that local capability for routing and need an Exchange server present. Doesn't mean you have to keep all the mailboxes on site. You just kind of can get away with one CAS server, but sometimes you need to keep one Exchange server in the environment, ongoing. But whether you do that permanently or just for the migration, it really does help with the migration. It allows you to really do a migration without any third-party tools, and it allows you to have really true, full, rich coexistence where for the entire period that you migrate the mailboxes, the capabilities or the functionality of users in the cloud versus users on-premise, they basically can't even tell. There's delegation, free busy information, everything works seamlessly, and you can use the Exchange admin console in 2013 to manage all your users, whether they're in Office 365 or on-premise. So there's really nice single pane of glass functionality that's available for that. So hybrid's a great way to start, and the best way to make sure that a migration can be done that allows you all the time that you want to plan it out and make sure that you have a good support structure for end users, good messaging. But again, it might be a good solution in the long run or permanently, at least for now anyways. If you do get rid of your Exchange on-premise environment completely, pretty much most customers we work with are going to need some kind of an SMTP relay. You need servers, fax machines, printers, applications, other on-premise devices or systems that need to be able to relay email. So if you do get rid of Exchange altogether, you need to set up some kind of SMTP relay. It doesn't have to be super complicated. It could be open source. You could just use the version that comes for free in IIS, but you'll have to plan a little bit of that relay capabilities for those systems that need to do that. Another consideration is PSTs or archives. You know, the Office 365, the Exchange Online mailbox size is 50 gig, which is usually much bigger than any organization lets users have on premise. And that's a great thing. I mean, the ability for users to have 50 gig in their inbox is phenomenal. It's great for end users because people don't have to archive constantly, so they love it. And it's good for IT administrators because all that information remains in the inbox, so you can search it, you can do legal holds, and it helps with compliance as well as just control over information. So that's great, but the problem is if there are big archives, either in PSTs or other archive formats or third-party solutions, that's got to, you know, you have to migrate all that content up to Office 365. So there's third-party tools to do that. You can re-ingest that back into the Exchange environment before you migrate the mailbox, so that that's all combined in one kind of process. So there's a couple different ways to handle it, but that's one consideration, that if you have large archives or PSTs out there, you definitely have to think about how you're going to get that to Exchange Online. Public folders, if you still use those, there's still a challenge. There's a multi-step process that's somewhat painful to migrate each public folder, and there's quite a bit of manual work required to do that. So if you still use those, you know, they're still kind of time-consuming and tricky to migrate those, and then, you know, you kind of have to manually validate the process and that all the content made it there. There isn't a great tool for validating the whole folder structure, the number of items in the folders, etc. So public folders still require a bit of work if you have those, and the more you have and the bigger they are, the more work it is. Dynamic distribution lists, if you use those, so we have some customers that use a ton of them and some that use almost none or none. But if you have those, they have to be recreated manually. There is no process for converting those, and the hybrid configuration does not automatically create those in Office 365. Whatever your messaging hygiene solution is, the hygiene solution in Office 365, the forefront, is very good, but if you have whitelists, blacklists, any other configuration you've done for hygiene, you know, that will have to be reconfigured in Exchange Online. And then DLP, or data loss prevention, and email retention policy. If you have requirements or compliance around, you know, retaining email for 7 years or anything for compliance purposes or DLP, you can do legal holds in Office 365, but you can't just keep every email there for 7 years or whatever. And you can't, basically, you can't prohibit users from permanently deleting items if they choose to do that, unless it's on a legal hold. But if you put every mailbox on legal hold, then you would probably exceed the 50 gig limit, and then email would be aged out. So you need either an on-premise environment, and you need to route email back to your on-premise environment, at least for archiving and retention purposes, or you need to look at a third-party solution that handles email retention. Some of the migration tools that we've used and had some pretty good success with, there's always native. If you have hybrid configuration, you effectively need to have Exchange 2010 CAS server if you're talking about Exchange 2007 or older, or you need Exchange 2013 in place, and then there's some hybrid configuration work that has to be done. But if you have that and you're on the required service pack and cumulative update, then you can, you know, basically migrate. You can set up a hybrid configuration, and you can migrate the mailboxes as desired once, you know, the directory synchronization has been performed and the accounts have been seeded. And that's the best way to do it, easily worth the work of upgrading Exchange, you know, the right service packs or cumulative updates to allow for hybrid. It definitely saves a lot of work, as well as obviously the time and expense of a third-party tool. If you do need a third-party tool because you can't get Exchange the required version, you're coming from a non-Exchange environment like Google Mail or some other mail solution, then there's some other third-party solutions that are great at handling that. There's Skykick. They do a great job. One of the things that they do well is they actually go out, and if the clients are older, the Outlook client is older, it'll go update the Outlook client and change the account settings to get it to redirect to the Office 365 account, which is great. It just saves, you know, having to deal with users updating their Outlook account, etc. So that works great, especially on older versions of Outlook that aren't compatible to automatically recognize that. Outlook 2013 does that, but the older versions don't. BitTitan is another good one. Dell Software Migration Manager for Exchange and Code 2. And all these vendors also have solutions that handle some of the public folders and some of those other aspects that are quite nice. So these are some of the tools that we've had success with. They're all priced a little bit differently, and they all have some strengths and weaknesses in terms of what they do well or what they don't do. But these are all good tools for migrating the mailboxes. The next workload is SharePoint Online. And unlike Exchange, SharePoint Online does not have 100% feature parity with SharePoint on-premise. So deploying SharePoint Online is a little bit trickier. Well, I don't know. Exchange Online is still pretty tricky, but it's got different trickiness, I guess, if that's appropriate to say. It's got the list of limitations that online does not have with the on-premise environment is longer than this, but the biggest ones, and I think the most pertinent ones that we think as a team are left out, is limitations on domains and URLs. There's no host headers or alternative access mapping, so you don't have the ability to just deploy any kind of IIS site you want to with SharePoint on the back end. It's basically your domain.sharepoint.com, and that's kind of it. And then everything's a site collection underneath that, so there's no web applications. There's no custom site definitions or provisioning, so if you have those, that kind of is lost in the migration to SharePoint Online. No full trust solutions, no performance point services. Performance point is, for dashboards, KPIs, that kind of thing, so that's not available. No SSRS integration mode, so if you have integration with SQL Server reporting services to render reports and do that kind of thing, that is not something you can do with Office 365 today. No on-premise search index and no self-service site creation. So those are that's not the exhaustive list. You can go to TechNet to look at an exhaustive list, but I think those are the big ones. But in addition to those, probably the bigger problem is that a lot of SharePoint environments have quite a bit of customization that's been done. There's a lot of third-party solutions that have been added that are not available on Office 365 today, at least not, in an exact like-for-like, comparison between what's on-premise and what's in Office 365. A lot of customers have deployed custom solutions and used the SharePoint APIs to write a bunch of custom code, and that's not easily ported to Office 365. It can be done, but it can be a fair amount of work to do that. So that really prohibits some people from, really moving an on-premise SharePoint environment to SharePoint Online. There really is no hybrid configuration like there is with Exchange, where you can have mailbox spread across the two environments and communicating back and forth seamlessly. The hybrid configuration for SharePoint is really federated search, where we can have the search index shared between SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Premise, so that I can do a single search in either environment and get a result set that spans both the on-premise environment and the SharePoint Online environment. And this is new, by the way. The way it used to be, or the way it's been, in fact, the way it, up until right now, still is that you can have SharePoint On-Premise index SharePoint Online, but even then, you can't go to the same search center. You can't do one search against both sources. You have to go to different search centers and do the searches independently. But that's changing. SharePoint 2016 is going to allow that fully federated search capability, and there's going to be an update specifically that updates out in preview, but it's going to be out probably another couple months for GA. And that update to SharePoint 2013 is going to allow us fully federated search. You will have to have a SharePoint 2013 server with this patch, though, to allow that. So that's kind of what hybrid looks like, really, right? The content's got to be in one place or the other. It's its own topology, but it's this federated search capability that really kind of provides a linkage between the two. The one thing that SharePoint Online is really good for, and one of the best use cases for it, even if you can't move, let's say, your whole intranet there or your on-premise environment, is it's really well suited for extranets and external access. A lot of customers have not deployed SharePoint with external access because it's complicated and it's got a bunch of security, issues around it, and you have to, configure forms-based authentication and figure that part out. So a lot of folks have never really done that. But with Office 365, it's obviously already open to the entire internet, so it's a lot easier to do that. So, even creating some sites or site collections for some departments or some specific use cases where folks in your organization want to collaborate with external vendors, contractors, et cetera. It's a great use case for that. And we see a lot of high adoption in that particular use case and people that want to use it in that way. So that's one thing that it's really good at, and that can certainly be done in parallel with continuing to keep your on-premise environment going. For migration tools on the SharePoint side, there's an Office 365 import service. This is pretty new. This has only been out for about a month. But you can either upload the data over a network or you can ship the data on physical drives. One problem with this is you have to put the data, you have to put SharePoint, whatever content you're moving, you got to put it in read-only mode so that obviously people aren't making changes to that content as you're replicating it or you're migrating it. So, but that is a new service that's provided that you can do either on a drive or network. There's also some third-party solutions, Metalogic's Content Matrix, AppPoint, DocAv, and Dell Software Migration Suite. These are also good migration tools that you can use that we've had good success with. One of the benefits of these tools is that they're able to, basically do some aggregation, some consolidation, or break out content and structure it differently on the Office 365 side if you want to. So you could take different document libraries and consolidate them into one based on specific metadata or even date. You can filter what content you want to move and where you want to move it to. You can change the permission structure on the fly. So it's a good opportunity if you want to make some changes to the existing environment as part of that migration. Some of these other migration tools are very powerful and allow you to do implement a lot of those things as part of that process. And then the last workload, the last main workload anyways, is Skype for Business, and like I said earlier, this is the Lync component. And there's a lot of new stuff coming out for Skype for Business that's really going to be exciting and kind of a game changer relative to Skype for Business functionality and what's possible in Skype Online. So what's coming soon, and it's actually already available in preview. We've actually been in it for the last two months, and it's supposed to be out by the end of 2015 here. But it's what they're going to be enabling for Skype for Business Online, which has been available in Skype for Business and Lync on-premise for quite some time, for many years. But what's going to be available online is PSTN dial-in conferencing. So that's being able to join a web conference from your cell phone or basically just from an external phone number without having to access the Lync or the Skype for Business client. Cloud PBX with PSTN outbound calling, so you can actually provision a phone number from Office 365 and you can use basically your Skype for Business Online client to place calls, do call forwarding, call routing, and basically use it as a primary phone system, a cloud-based phone system, or a cloud-based phone. In fact, I have a Polycom phone that connects directly to it. You'd never know that it wasn't a traditional PBX. It looks and feels just like any typical phone system. It's just connecting to Skype for Business Online. You can port existing phone numbers over to the service, so I can take existing phone numbers that I have with the carrier and port those over. And they have Skype meeting broadcast, which is kind of like the GoToMeeting webinar we're on right now, but it's for large, web conferences or webinars or broadcasts of more than 250 users. So that service is out too. So this is, pretty exciting stuff that basically that much voice and telecom functionality is going to be available in the cloud. Similar with SharePoint, there's a lot of features that are not available today or will not be available with some of these new features like PSTN and inbound and outbound and the cloud PBX. There's going to be quite a few features that at least initially are not going to be available. I think they will be built into the service eventually. I don't know how long that will take, obviously, but what's not going to be available initially is there's no archiving. So on-premise, you can archive instant messages and conferences. You can't archive it in Office 365. There's no persistent chat. There's no response or hunt groups, no unified dial plan, no auto attendant, no call park, no group call pickup, no transcription of voice to text, no receptionist console. You can use a third-party product for that, but that's not built in. And there's no integration with an existing on-premise IP PBX. So for a traditional phone system that has a lot of those features or some of those features, maybe using Skype for Business Online is not practical right now anyways. But again, the hybrid approach here is something that is feasible and could potentially add a lot of value. And what that really looks like is that, for small offices or remote users that work from home, Skype for Business Online could be a perfect solution for those folks to have full, PBX functionality and all the other IM presence, chat, web conferencing, desktop sharing, video, but also full, full PBX and cloud-based IP telephony functionality without needing to deploy any on-premise infrastructure or them having to be on a corporate VPN or any of that stuff. So that could be and has been pretty well adopted or looked at for this hybrid situation, particularly for, again, smaller offices, smaller groups of users, remote users, and enabling that functionality for those. So the case for hybrid, again, the point here is that with all these workloads, you have to look at each one of them separately. And what the right strategy is for Exchange Online may not be the right strategy for SharePoint, and what's right for SharePoint may not be right for Skype for Business. Really just depends on what you use it for today, how much customizations you have, what other ties it has with applications you run on premise, and whether that can really be decoupled or what that needs to look like going forward. But the case for hybrid is a powerful one in the sense that I don't think it's necessarily an all or nothing, kind of approach. Office 365 is obviously attractive for many reasons. It saves money. When we were upgraded to Exchange 2016, I didn't even notice it. And it wasn't until I went to the admin console that I even realized we'd been upgraded. And that's kind of how it's supposed to be, right? An upgrade with actually no notification, nobody even noticed it. There was no interruption that we could ever tell. It allows you to focus on your core business and not IT. You can easily scale up or down. It gives that agility we talked about in the beginning, and you can more easily work with people outside your organization because it is in the public internet. It is out there already, and that makes it that much easier to extend it. But on-premise applications still have a lot that, as we've talked about, can't be done in Office 365 necessarily. So if you have existing investments in SharePoint, Skype for Business, or you need some of that other functionality, at least maintaining that functionality for the users that need it or the offices that need it, hybrid is a great solution that allows you to do that. And in Office 365, you can have different subscriptions. For example, one that allows for Cloud PBX and one that doesn't. And you can extend those subscriptions just to the users that need that functionality, where you're willing to pay for that. But for the users that don't need it, you don't have to extend that functionality to them. You can have those folks use a different subscription that doesn't include that, but that also you're not paying for. So there's a lot of flexibility and freedom there. Office 365 and the entire 2013 and 2016, Skype for Business 2015, the entire stack is really built for hybrid. All of the management consoles have full integration with Office 365. You get to manage users from one single interface, and everything's really built to allow you to manage the entire on-prem and cloud-based environment from one GUI, one console, and they've done a lot of work to do that. So all of those pieces are there. That allow you to really manage hybrid as if it's all sitting in one place and actually not knowing the difference, or the difference, but more importantly, the user's not knowing the difference. So I ran 3 minutes over. Sorry, I tried to get it in 45 minutes, but that's all we had for today. We covered a lot of ground. Hopefully you got some benefit from the different topics we discussed. If there's something we can do to help you on your journey to the cloud, we'd love to have those discussions or see what we can do to help you out. Otherwise, I hope you had benefit from the webinar today, and thank you so much for your time and attending. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.